Assalamualaikum dan selamat sejahtera. Anda bersama saya Nabilah, Khaleeda, dan ini Niaga AWANI. Seperti biasa pada jam ini kita akan berikan laporan berita bisnes kewangan dan juga ekonomi. Dan semalam adalah Hari Buruh ataupun Hari Pekerja, dan ada satu pengumuman dibuat di mana syarikat pelaburan berkaitan kerajaan GLIC secara kolektif melaksanakan dasar gaji kehidupan, memastikan semua pekerja tetap warga negara Malaysia kini memperoleh pendapatan melebihi ambang gaji bulanan. Dan GLIC yang telah memenuhi komitmen ini termasuk Khazanah Nasional Berhad, Permodalan Nasional Berhad PNB, Kumpulan Wang Simpanan Pekerja KWSP, Kumpulan Wang Persaraan diperbadankan KWAP, Lembaga Tabung Angkatan Tentera LTAT dan Lembaga Tabung Haji TH. Dan dalam satu kenyataan bersama dikeluarkan oleh 6 GLIC semalam, Menteri Kewangan 2 Datuk Seri Amir Hamzah Azizan berkata bahawa langkah kolektif GLIC untuk melaksanakan gaji kehidupan wajar merupakan langkah penting untuk meningkatkan tahap, memastikan pertumbuhan adalah inklusif dan berakar umbi dalam kesejahteraan rakyat Malaysia. Jadi untuk kita berbincang lanjut, kita terus bersama dengan Datuk Dr. Madilin Berma, Fellow Kehormat Institut Masa Depan Malaysia di dalam talian. Mungkin kalau Datuk boleh kongsikan pertama sekali bagaimana dasar ekonomi, kadar inflasi dan juga permintaan industri ini mempengaruhi pertumbuhan gaji secara keseluruhannya. Kalau Datuk boleh kongsikan.
Okey, terima kasih Nabilah. Selamat Hari Pekerja.
Selamat Hari Pekerja, Datuk.
Okey. So bagaimana benda ni gaji minimum? Bukan gaji minimum, sebenarnya pendapatan dia panggilnya kehidupan wajar. Gaji ataupun upah kehidupan wajar lah sepatutnya ya. Itu apa yang benda ini, dia satu ialah bila kita melihat bagaimana upah boleh mempengaruhi ekonomi ya. Apabila dia ada dua sih. Kalau upah kita tinggi, maka rakyat mempunyai kuasa beli yang tinggi. Okey, dia boleh berbelanja dengan lebih. So bila dia boleh berbelanja dengan lebih, maka secara tidak langsung dan secara langsung dia boleh menyebabkan peningkatan dari segi pengeluaran. Jadi itu mengapa kita sangat memberi penekanan terhadap aspek gaji ni. Dan kalau kita lihat dari segi catatan yang dikeluarkan ataupun data yang dikeluarkan oleh Jabatan Statistik menunjukkan bahawa pendapatan rakyat Malaysia median penengah iaitu sekitar 3045. Ini yang terkini, RM3045 median. Jadi bermaknanya separuh rakyat Malaysia menerima pendapatan kurang daripada itu dan separuh rakyat Malaysia menerima pendapatan dan lebih daripada itu. Jadi ini bermakna 3045 ini adalah dipanggil pendapatan menengah. Jadi dengan gaji wajar tadi yang disebut yang diumumkan itu, kita lihat nilainya ialah RM3,100. So ini satu catatan yang baik lah ya. Alright, itu dulu.
Dan Datuk telah sebut berkenaan dengan gaji kehidupan wajar. Boleh Datuk bantu kami faham bagaimana ia ditentukan sebenarnya dan bagaimana kos hidup termasuk perumahan penjagaan kesihatan dan juga pendidikan diambil kira dalam pengiraan kos kehidupan gaji wajar ini?
Okey Nabilah, kita kena tahu dua perkara. Satu ialah upah minimum. Satu ialah pendapatan yang disebut tadilah ya, untuk kehidupan wajar. Yang kita bincang tadi tu, yang dilancarkan oleh GLIC itu ialah pendapatan kehidupan wajar. Okay. Saya nak membezakan dulu dua-dua ni. Pertama sekali kita kena tahu upah minimum. Upah minimum adalah upah yang ditetapkan, yang ada mandatory dia. Ada undang-undang menetapkan bahawa upah minimum kita di Malaysia sekarang ialah RM1,700. Iaitu pendapatan yang perlu dilaksanakan, yang perlu dibayar oleh majikan kepada pekerja. Itu dari segi undang-undang. Ini ditetapkan oleh satu majlis. Okey, satu majlis, skim pekerjaan dan sebagainya. Ada wakil majikan, wakil pekerja dan sebagainya. Mereka menetapkan dan ini dibawa ke kementerian, dibawa ke parlimen, ditetapkan RM1,700. Dia hanyalah pendapatan untuk basic saja. Basic tu maksudnya apa dia? Untuk membayar untuk membayar gaji, untuk dia cukup untuk makan minum dia. Itu je. RM1,700 di Malaysia. Tapi rakyat Malaysia kata, ya ampun, manalah cukup duit RM1,700 tu ya, Nabilah.
Ya.
So, jadi sekarang Bank negara pernah dalam tahun, saya tak ingat, 2000 lebih kot Bank negara telah memperkenalkan satu istilah yang dia kata pendapatan wajar, kehidupan wajar. Jadi bermaksudnya di sini, berapakah jumlah pendapatan selain daripada asas tadi, selain daripada 1,700 tadi, perlu ada tambahan-tambahan lain untuk memberi mereka kehidupan yang lebih selesa, kehidupan yang lebih bermaruah. Dia kata tak adalah macam merempat sangat. So jadi diletakkan, dia kata perlu ada pendapatan yang lebih tinggi sikit, iaitu membolehkan satu isi rumah atau seorang orang bujang ini untuk hidup dengan agak selesa. Ini yang ditetapkan dengan dipanggilkan pendapatan kehidupan yang saya kata tadi, yang wajar tadi.
Yeah.
Jadi ini yang baru diperkenalkan oleh GLIC. Jadi menurut GLIC, mereka memperkenalkan nilai 3,100 dan ini bukan mandatory. Berbanding dengan minimum 1,700, yang ini ialah over and above 1,700. Tapi lebih baik sebab dia lebih tinggi daripada pendapatan minimum. Cuma cara yang ditentukan oleh kumpulan yang nak melaksanakan. Dia tidak ada undang-undang yang ditetapkan oleh kerajaan. Itu yang bagus ya.
Dan kalau kita kalau kita lihat gaji kehidupan wajar yang seperti yang Datuk katakan adalah RM3,100 sebulan dan dengan gaji minimum 1,700, kalau kita nak tengok jaraknya masih jauh untuk sektor swasta. Tapi kalau boleh bantu doktor bantu faham untuk situasi inflasi yang sihat, kita perlukan dengan memastikan majikan swasta mampu bayar gaji inflasi kita yang berada pada kadar 1.8% tahun lepas dan inflasi yang sihat disifatkan pada 2%. Jadi bagaimana doktor boleh terangkan korelasi antara dua ini dalam berbakikan 2 minit?
Ini sangat penting ya, sebab dilema ini memang akan berterusan. Sebab kalau kita lihat, nak melaksanakan naikkan daripada 1,500 ke 1,700, majikan bukan main pening kepala. Sebab bagi dia ini akan melibatkan kos pada dia. Apa yang akan berlaku, mereka boleh naikkan gaji itu, tetapi dia akan pindahkan kos barangan kepada pengguna. Ini yang kita takut. Jadi kerajaan sekarang ini, yang kerajaan ini lakukan, memastikan bahawa pendapatan wajar, gaji minimum dilaksanakan, dan pada masa yang sama kerajaan akan membantu dari segi satu ialah subsidi bersasar, yang kedua ialah dengan memberi bantuan kalau kita tengok SARA dan sebagainya tu. So itu yang kerajaan perlu lakukan dan terus lakukan untuk menampung pendapatan yang diterima oleh pekerja dengan pendapatan yang minimum, dan pada masa yang sama cuba kontrol inflasi.
Dan ini sebenarnya adalah berita baik untuk pekerja-pekerja dan juga tenaga kerja di Malaysia ini, di mana kalau kita dapat saksikan ini adalah peningkatan ataupun pergerakan yang positif untuk kita. Namun mungkin apa cabaran yang boleh kita jangkakan secara ringkaslah, kalau boleh Datuk boleh kongsikan cabaran untuk melaksanakan dalam peningkatan gaji yang wajar ini kepada 3,100.
Okey, cabaran dia ialah kita Malaysia, majoriti daripada syarikat kita adalah perniagaan kecil sederhana. Jadi mereka tidak boleh kita bandingkan dengan GLIC. Sebab yang 6 tadi yang Nabilah sebut itu adalah GLIC, dan untung tak payah ceritalah keuntungannya. Memang bagi saya mereka lah yang wajar memulakan projek ini. Tetapi bagi EKS atau perusahaan kecil sederhana, ini satu cabaran yang sangat-sangat besar bagi mereka, iaitu untuk memberi pendapatan yang lebih tinggi. Nak sampai 1,700 tu bukan main seksa lagi. Mereka masa mereka bermesyuarat nak menetapkan 1,700. Itu pun sebab ini satu cara untuk mengelakkan masalah kebergantungan kepada pekerja asing. So kalau kita menetapkan gaji pada 1,700, diharapkan rakyat Malaysia akan mendapat kesempatan untuk bekerja dengan syarikat kita di negara kita. Itulah dia cabaran dia, nak melaksanakan gaji minimum dan pada masa yang sama nak menaikkan gaji minimum daripada 1,700 untuk memenuhi pendapatan wajar ke 3,100 tu. Saya rasa banyak syarikat-syarikat, walaupun syarikat saiz sederhana dan besar pun sukar untuk melaksanakannya.
Okey. Antara cabarannya adalah untuk melaksanakannya dan juga kita tidak mahu berlaku ketirisan dan mungkin kita tak nak berlaku jurang itu makin lebar, kejurangan itu makin lebar dan itu akan perlu dipantau ataupun dititik beratkan oleh kerajaan dan badan-badan yang berkaitan dan itu adalah perkongsian dari Datuk Dr. Madeline Burma, Fellow Kehormat Institut Masa Depan Malaysia atas perkongsian itu tadi dan segalanya akan kami rangkumkan dalam semua platform digital AWANI dan juga astrowani.com. Dan saya akan teruskan dengan seterusnya perkembangan ringgit di mana ringgit meneruskan aliran meningkatnya berbanding dolar Amerika Syarikat apabila ditutup pada paras tertinggi dalam tempoh 6 bulan didorong oleh petanda ketegangan perdagangan yang kelihatan mula mereda, kata seorang penganalisis. Dan pada 6 pada petang Rabu, unit tempatan meningkat kepada 4.3245 atau 3300 berbanding dolar Amerika Syarikat daripada paras penutup 4.3615 atau 3665 pada Isnin. Dan sekarang saya akan tunjukkan pergerakan ringgit itu sendiri untuk setakat pagi ini. Kalau kita boleh tunjukkan di mana pada 2 Mei untuk bulan baru ini, 2 Mei 2025, ringgit itu berada pada paras 4.3225. Kalau kita boleh tunjukkan pergerakan ringgit itu sendiri dalam jangka masa seminggu lah, dalam prestasi seminggu ini, kita ubah sedikit data ini. Baik. Kita dapat saksikan di mana nilai ringgit itu berubah dalam jangka masa ni. Ini adalah 29 hari bulan di mana semalam adalah hari pekerja dan ringgit itu kita dapat saksikan tidak ada dalam data ini. 29 hari bulan adalah dalam sekitar 4.3. Kalau kita tekan kat sini 4.3324, kita dapat saksikan pergerakan graf ini menurun dan jika graf ini menurun, pengukuhan nilai ringgit itu mengukuh berbanding dengan $1 Amerika Syarikat dan nilai ringgit itu dapat kita saksikan pengukuhan apabila ketegangan antara Malaysia dan juga Amerika Syarikat berkaitan perdagangan itu mula mereda dan itu dapat kita saksikan kalau kita bandingkan pada bulan lalu April yang memuncak sehingga ke paras hampir 4.3816. Itu adalah berkaitan dengan prestasi ringgit untuk setakat pagi ini pada jam 9 suku ataupun 9.16 pagi. Dan untuk berkaitan dengan Bursa Malaysia pula, ia mengakhiri dagangan Selasa dengan lebih rendah di asal aktiviti pengambilan untung selepas beberapa hari meningkat di tengah-tengah prestasi pasaran serantau yang kebanyakannya positif. Pada 5 petang Rabu, indeks penanda aras FTSE Bursa Malaysia KLCI FBM KLCI susut 6.03 mata kepada 1515.56 daripada paras 1521.59 di akhir dagangan semalam. Dan sekarang kita saksikan pembukaan semula Bursa Malaysia untuk setakat pagi ini. Kalau kita boleh saksikan pergerakan nilai Bursa FBM KLCI itu adalah sekitar paras, sebentar saya buka, adalah pada paras 1535.94, turun sedikit 0.28% dan 4.28 mata. Kalau kita nak saksikan prestasi FBM KLCI dalam jangka masa seminggu bermula dengan Jumaat pada minggu lalu sehinggalah ke Jumaat hari ini dan semalam pasaran tutup untuk hari pekerja di mana public holiday dan kita dapat saksikan ini adalah nilai tertinggi Bursa Malaysia dalam jangka masa seminggu melepasi paras 1,540 dan pada minggu lalu pada hari Jumaat nilainya adalah ataupun parasnya prestasinya adalah pada 1,508.89 dan ini juga disumbangkan ataupun faktornya adalah berikutan ketegangan ataupun ketegangan antara Malaysia dan juga Amerika Syarikat itu telah mereda dan kita dapat saksikan pengukuhan FTSE Bursa Malaysia itu semakin meningkat menuju ke minggu-minggu yang akan datang. Ini adalah sedikit sebanyak pergerakan ataupun prestasi FTSE Bursa Malaysia untuk setakat hari ini. Dan kita akan teruskan dengan perkembangan atau perbincangan seterusnya bersama pakar yang lain adalah berkenaan dengan SST ataupun percukaian, di mana penangguhkan peluasan cukai jualan dan perkhidmatan SST adalah langkah bijak tanpa sebarang kelemahan yang jelas. Dan pakar ekonomi Dr. Geoffrey Williams memberi amaran bahawa meneruskan peluasan SST seperti yang dirancang akan meningkatkan kos sara hidup bagi pengguna dan menaikkan kos operasi bagi perniagaan, kos yang mungkin akan dipindahkan melalui kenaikan harga. Dan William sebaliknya mengesyorkan agar kerajaan menggunakan masa ini untuk menilai model percukaian alternatif, terutamanya potensi cukai e-pembayaran atau EPT. Jadi untuk kita berbincang lanjut dan berbincang lebih mendalam, kita bersama dengan Profesor Madya Dr. Aimi Zulhazmi Abdul Rashid, penganalisis ekonomi UniKL Business School. Prof, Assalamualaikum. Pertama sekali, mungkin boleh kongsikan apakah penangguhan peluasan SST ini mencerminkan ketidaktentuan dalam perancangan dasar fiskal negara dan bagaimana kerajaan dapat pastikan ketelusan dan konsistensi dalam pelaksanaan dasar cukai untuk kita elakkan ketidakpastian dalam kalangan pelabur dan juga pemain industri. Silakan.
Nabilah, selamat pagi. Selamat sejahtera semua. Bagi saya tidak sama sekali lah ya, langkah yang dibuat oleh kerajaan ini. Bagi saya kerajaan sebenarnya amat peka dengan dinamik perubahan ataupun pola perubahan pada setiap masa. Jadi kerajaan melihat pada kesesuaian untuk melaksanakannya atau tidak. Bagi saya juga tidak boleh nafikan sememangnya para pelabur maupun pemain industri mahukan kestabilan dan untuk memudahkan mereka merancang perniagaan masing-masing, membuat unjuran mereka masing-masing. Tetapi dalam keadaan persekitaran dunia sekarang ni, dalam keadaan geopolitiknya sekarang, dalam keadaan kewangan dan keadaan ekonomi sekarang, yang pastinya juga mereka juga terkesan dengan apa yang berlaku pada persekitaran sekeliling. Jadi kepekaan kerajaan dengan isu dunia, isu tempatan dan menangguhkan pelaksanaan dasar cukai ini ya bersabit dengan pelbagai perubahan. Contohnya kita tahu pada bulan April yang baru semalam adalah Trump tarif yang telah memporak-perandakan perdagangan dunia dan justru malahan KDNK Amerika Syarikat juga baru dikeluarkan telah menyusut sebanyak negatif 0.3% untuk suku pertama tahun ini. Dan pada masa yang sama juga banyak unjuran-unjuran dan negara juga telah menegaskan bahawa mereka juga akan mungkin mengkaji semula unjuran yang dikatakan untuk tahun ini pada awalnya antara 4.5 ke 5.5%, dan kita telah pun menerima unjuran-unjuran awal daripada Bank Dunia untuk Malaysia iaitu di bawah 4% KDNK pertumbuhan tahun ini. Jadi ini adalah isu-isu dunia, isu-isu tempatan yang kerajaan peka, dan bagi saya tidaklah begitu memberikan satu tekanan pada kerajaan, adakah ia pada pelabur dan sebagainya. Pada masa yang sama juga Nabilah, kita harus melihat pada kepekaan kerajaan dari segi aspek kepada industri ataupun segmen PMKS perniagaan mikro kecil sederhana, iaitu isu-isu tempatan dengan pelaksanaan polisi seperti gaji minima yang baru dilaksanakan beberapa bulan yang lepas kenaikan kepada RM1,700 daripada RM1,500, memberi banyak kesan kalau kerajaan melaksanakan juga ia memberikan pelbagai impak pelbagai kesan dan juga kita dalam proses melihat kepada pelaksanaan RON 95 yang dikatakan akan berlaku pada pertengahan tahun ini, walaupun kita tahu mekanisme yang dikatakan adalah berdasarkan penggunaan MyCard, dan juga begitu dengan dasar gaji progresif pelaksanaan pelbagai lagi. Jadi untuk perniagaan di Malaysia untuk mengadaptasi kepada pelaksanaan secara langsung mungkin akan memberikan kesan yang berbagai lah. Jadi apa yang kita harus melihat ini adalah satu langkah yang dinamik yang perlu dilihat sebagai satu bantuan lah kalau tidak melaksanakan cukai dan sebagainya. Itu kita harus melihat dari segi aspek positif, Nabilah.
Dengan segala langkah reformasi kerajaan yang berlaku pada waktu ini dan kita tahu ini bukanlah waktu yang terbaik, tapi mungkin Prof boleh cadangkan ataupun beri cadangan pendapat tersendiri berkenaan dengan bila waktu sesuai untuk SST, peluasan SST ini dilaksanakan, sebab kalau kita tahu peluasan SST tanpa perlindungan sewajarnya boleh menjejaskan daya saing industri tempatan di peringkat global, dan apa juga langkah yang boleh kita ambil untuk melindungi industri tempatan daripada menerima kesan negatif peluasan cukai ini, Prof?
Baik, kalau kita mahu melihat apakah yang boleh dibantu, ya, kalau kita yang seperti Nabilah katakan pada awal tadi, sahabat saya Jeffrey William mengatakan kalau dilaksanakan ia akan memberikan kesan kepada kos pengeluaran barang Malaysia, ya. Jadi kalau kita mahu melihat pula dari segi aspek ekspor, kalau kita lihat SST ni hanya untuk barangan dalam Malaysia, tetapi ia berbeza dengan barangan yang diekspor ke luar negara. Jadi kalau di sinilah kalau kita melihat perbezaannya, jadi tidak ada sebarang kesan langsung kecuali lah barangan keluaran tempatan itu akan diekspor. Jadi saya ambil contohnya industri perabot. Industri perabot mungkin ada kesan dari segi aspek bahan mentah, ya, mungkin daripada kayu getah dan sebagainya, ataupun dari segi barangan yang separuh proses yang digunakan dan dikenakan SST dalam rantai nilai ataupun dalam supply chain itu sendiri. Jadi bagi membantu para peniaga tempatan, terutamanya pengekspor, contohnya pengekspor perabot tadi, adakan insentif percukaian untuk setiap ekspor itu, diberikan pengecualian cukai bersamaan dengan cukai SST yang mereka serap dalam proses pengeluaran. Bagaimanapun sudah ada pelbagai insentif sebenarnya untuk pengecualian cukai untuk kos pemasaran barangan untuk diekspor melalui agensi-agensi seperti Matrade, ya, iaitu di bawah MITI, yang ia boleh digabungkan untuk menjadi lebih mantap. Jadi kita juga boleh belajar daripada negara-negara pengekspor utama dunia seperti China, Korea Selatan, Jepun, ya, bagaimana kerajaan mereka masing-masing membantu GLC mereka dan juga PMKS mereka dalam satu rantai nilai yang menyokong satu sama lain. Jadi kita bukan hanya melihat Nabilah dari segi aspek percukaian, tapi juga kita melihat dari segi keseluruhan ekosistem setiap industri itu sendiri. Jadi pelaksanaan peluasan SST ini harus dilihat dari segi aspek bukan hanya menghukum sesuatu pihak, tetapi juga melihat daripada ekosistem setiap industri itu sendiri.
Prof, dalam berberakikan lebih kurang 2 minit, pakar Dr. Geoffrey Williams juga ada mencadangkan untuk kita melihat instead of SST, kita melihat kepada digital tax. Jadi dalam konteks ekonomi digital yang berkembang pesat, sejauh mana cukai digital boleh menjadi alternatif yang lebih adil dan juga efisien berbanding SST, dan apakah mekanisme yang perlu diwujudkan untuk kita pastikan pematuhan dan penguatkuasaan cukai digital yang berkesan?
Okey, baik. Kalau untuk perniagaan B2B kita telah pun ada sistem. Tapi pula bagaimana dengan B2C ataupun B2B, B2C? Ini yang kita harus melihat. Jadi kalau melihat mekanisme sistem yang kita telah ada sebenarnya untuk B2C, iaitu sistem e-pembayaran dalam ekonomi digital dapat digunakan untuk pelaksanaan cukai digital. Iaitu kenapa ia mengikut kemampuan ataupun kuasa beli pembeli. Jadi ia lebih tepatlah. Kalau kita melihat pembangunan sektor e-pembayaran dalam sektor kewangan, ya, ialah sejajar dengan dikatakan rangka kerja ekonomi digital Malaysia yang juga dikenali sebagai rangka tindakan ekonomi My Digital. Jadi peningkatan transaksi e-pembayaran boleh digunakan untuk digital tax, ya, untuk menjadi pemangkin kepada ekonomi digital negara, dan kita seharusnya faham bahawa ia dijangka ekonomi digital ini akan menyumbangkan sebanyak 25% pada kredit negara untuk tahun 2025. Malah di rantau Asia, Malaysia merupakan antara mempunyai kadar penembusan tertinggi, ya, untuk pembayaran, contohnya e-dompet online, ya, e-perkhidmatan. Dan sebab apa kadar pendigitalan kita yang tinggi, iaitu dengan penembusan internet kita melebihi 97%, penggunaan telefon mudah alih hampir 130%. Jadi kita sudah ada mekanisme sebenarnya melalui e-perkhidmatan atau e-pembayaran untuk sistem digital tax ini ataupun cukai digital ini, Nabilah.
Harapnya apa juga decision yang dibuat ataupun digubalkan, ia pada masa sama kita harap dapat meningkatkan pendapatan negara, tapi yang penting tidak meningkatkan beban rakyat itu sendiri. Jadi terima kasih diucapkan kepada Profesor Madya Dr. Aimi Zulhazmi Abdul Rashid, penganalisis ekonomi Uni KL Business School. Banyak lagi perkongsian dan perbincangan selepas ini. Jadi jangan ke mana-mana, kita berhenti seketika, kembali selepas ini.
kolaborasi antara TBS dan juga Astro buat julung kali meletup ke Borneo. Konsert meletup TBS di Miri Sarawak.
Hanya satu malam kita berhibur bersama bintang-bintang kesayangan anda. Konsert meletup TBS.
Nang Champion, Nang Legend.
17 Mei ini
Meriah bersama kami.
secara langsung.
Eksklusif di TBS dan Astro Go.
Malaysia sebenarnya berada di kedudukan kedua terburuk di dunia berkaitan keseimbangan hidup dan kerja.
LRT3 sudah akan mula beroperasi suku ketiga 2025. Kerja-kerja fizikal dan penstrukturan sudah mencecah 95%.
KPM sebenarnya sedang memperincikan cadangan untuk menyediakan allowance kos sara hidup tingkatan 6.
Melibat urus antara umat Islam dan agama lain penting supaya dapat mengelakkan ataupun membawa kepada Islamofobia.
Bertemu kembali dalam Niaga AWANI. Kalau tadi kita dah bincangkan tentang cukai SST dan juga tentang gaji yang wajar, sekarang kita sentuh tentang berkenaan dengan tarif di mana sistem ekonomi dunia diguncang dengan perang tarif yang dicetuskan oleh Donald Trump. Dunia moden yang selama ini bebas berdagang disentak dengan pemahaman ekonomi yang ekstrim oleh Presiden Amerika Syarikat itu. Dan kita nak tahu apa kesannya kepada negara berdagang seperti Malaysia. Dan kita akan terus bersama dengan Abdul Muiz Murhalim, pakar ekonomi MIDF Research untuk berbincang lanjut. Mungkin Assalamualaikum pertama sekali Muiz. Kalau kita lihat dalam suasana ekonomi dunia yang lebih tertumpu kepada perang dagangan kerana kenaikan tarif yang dijangka akan menyebabkan aktiviti dagangan akan lebih perlahan, ekonomi Amerika Syarikat sendiri mencatat penurunan 0.3% dalam suku pertama 2025 kalau kita bandingkan dengan suku sebelumnya. Jadi boleh Muiz ulas sedikit apa punca penurunan ini dan adakah kelembapan ekonomi ini akan menyebabkan Fed menurunkan kadar faedahnya bulan ini?
Assalamualaikum. Okey, pertama sekali bila kita lihat kepada penurunan KDNK ini adalah dalam jangkaan kerana memang kita dapati sentimen telah mula menurun pada beberapa bulan yang lalu dan ini menyebabkan memberi gambaran kemungkinan momentum pertumbuhan ekonomi memang dijangka akan perlahan. Pada masa sama memang bila kita lihat dari segi unjuran bagi pertumbuhan ekonomi Amerika Syarikat sendiri, ini dijangka akan lebih perlahan iaitu di bawah paras 2%. Melihat kepada kebimbangan bagaimana kesan kenaikan tarif ini mungkin akan menyebabkan tekanan inflasi mungkin akan terus meningkat dan pada masa sama keadaan permintaan mungkin akan lebih perlahan. Namun bila kita lihat dari segi punca sebenar penurunan ekonomi setakat ini masih tertumpu kepada perubahan yang berlaku akibat kenaikan ataupun lonjakan imports kerana kebimbangan tarif yang lebih tinggi ini akan menyebabkan kos pembelian yang lebih mahal. Dan pada masa sama kita dapati perbelanjaan kerajaan juga telah menurun pada suku pertama dan ini menjadi antara punca penurunan. Namun bila kita lihat dari segi aktiviti perbelanjaan sebenarnya masih dikira agak baik walaupun pertumbuhannya adalah perlahan sekitar 1.8% berbanding 4% yang dicatat pada suku keempat tahun lalu. Tapi bila kita lihat dari segi momentum ini kita perlu bersedia ada kemungkinan aktiviti mungkin akan lebih perlahan kerana kita dapati data-data terkini masih menunjukkan sentimen terus melemah dan ada kemungkinan besar akhirnya aktiviti perbelanjaan di Amerika Syarikat juga mungkin akan menurun dan ini mungkin memberi kesan kepada permintaan luar daripada Amerika Syarikat.
Abu Is, kalau kita lihat pada awal minggu ini, indeks harga pengeluar mencatatkan penurunan sebanyak 1.3% pada bulan Mac 2025. Selain kos yang menurun, data inflasi harga pengguna juga adalah lebih sederhana pada kadar 1.4% iaitu paling perlahan dalam tempoh 4 tahun. Jadi adakah ini memberi gambaran bahawa negara Malaysia akan menurunkan OPR pada mesyuarat minggu depan ataupun sebaliknya?
Kalau kita lihat dari satu sudut, memang tekanan inflasi yang lebih perlahan ini seakan memberi gambaran bahawa suasana ekonomi adalah lebih perlahan. Namun bila kita lihat dari segi inflasi teras khususnya, keadaannya masih dikira stabil iaitu kekal pada paras 1.9% dan ini memberi gambaran keadaan tekanan daripada permintaan dalam negara masih terkawal. Cuma bila kita lihat dari segi keputusan untuk mengubah OPR ini turut mengambil kira keputusan ataupun keadaan ekonomi domestik yang mana bila kita lihat dari segi perbelanjaan runcit, dari segi keadaan pasaran buruh ianya masih menunjukkan keadaan ekonomi negara masih berada dalam keadaan yang baik. Contohnya bila kita lihat keadaan pengangguran masih pada paras yang rendah, iaitu pada paras 3.1%. Jumlah penyertaan buruh di dalam negara juga terus meningkat kepada paras lebih daripada 70%. Yang mana ini adalah paras yang tertinggi. Dan ini turut menggambarkan keadaan ekonomi dalam negara yang baik terus memberi banyak peluang pekerjaan kepada lebih ramai individu. Dan kita dapati peningkatan pelancong asing juga turut sama menyumbang kepada peningkatan jualan runcit dalam negara. Jadi pada saya buat masa ini tiada alasan untuk bank negara memotong OPR. Namun bila kita lihat daripada segi jangkaan akan datang, mungkin kita perlu bersedia terdapat kebimbangan sekiranya momentum ekonomi negara mungkin akan perlahan, dan ini mungkin memberi ruang kepada bank negara untuk bersedia untuk membuat potongan.
Itu berkenaan dengan kadar dasar semalaman. Tapi bagaimana Muiz melihat perubahan dari segi tekanan harga global yang mungkin akan menjejaskan unjuran inflasi negara tahun ini? Sebab kalau kita lihat bank-bank pusat lain juga telah longgarkan dasar monetary nak menyokong ekonomi mereka. Jadi apa kemungkinan BNM pun akan turut sama mengambil keputusan yang sama?
Okey, kalau kita lihat dari segi pengamatan ataupun pemerhatian secara umum, memang kebanyakan pemerhati di pasaran mengambil kira pergerakan inflasi yang berlaku di negara luar, termasuk juga keputusan-keputusan yang dibuat oleh bank pusat di negara luar. Ini memberi gambaran kebanyakan keputusan yang melihat kepada melonggarkan dasar monetary memberi gambaran kepada suasana ekonomi yang mungkin dijangkakan lebih perlahan, mengambil kira kebimbangan kesan daripada perang dagangan yang berlaku. Namun seperti yang saya nyatakan tadi, kalau kita lihat dari segi keputusan yang dibuat oleh bank negara ini, mungkin kita dapati inflasi akan terus tampaknya akan lebih perlahan kerana masih berada di bawah paras unjuran 2 ke 3.5% yang diunjurkan oleh bank negara. Cuma bila seperti yang saya nyatakan, bila keputusan dibuat oleh bank negara ini mengambil kira bagaimana keadaan di luar itu memberi kesan kepada tekanan inflasi dalam negara, termasuk juga bagaimana suasana ekonomi negara setakat ini. Cuma bila kita lihat dari segi data-data ini masih terlalu awal untuk bank negara memberi satu signal keadaan akan terus perlahan, kerana kita dapati suasana ekonomi dalam negara masih dalam keadaan yang baik. Mungkin kalau kita lihat sekiranya pertumbuhan ekonomi di negara luar terus perlahan, mungkin itu memberi satu peluang untuk bank negara mula mengambil kira bahawa momentum ekonomi akan terus perlahan, dan potongan OPR sekiranya dibuat akan memberi signal kita perlu bersedia suasana ekonomi dijangka akan lebih perlahan berbanding sebelumnya.
Dan berbalik pada isu perang dagangan, kalau pada waktu ini tarikh timbal balik itu orang kata diposkan untuk 90 hari, dan Malaysia juga dijangka akan meneruskan perbincangan dengan kerajaan Amerika Syarikat bagi mencari satu bentuk perjanjian atau deal yang terbaik bagi kedua-dua pihak. Jadi apakah strategi yang boleh kita pertimbangkan, dan sekiranya Malaysia diminta untuk menyokong usaha Amerika Syarikat menurunkan defisit dagangannya, bagaimana ini akan memberi kesan jangka panjang kepada ekonomi negara secara keseluruhan?
Kalau kita lihat secara umum, mungkin kita perlu berusaha untuk mencari jalan bagaimana untuk mengurangkan kesan langsung daripada kenaikan tarif yang dibuat oleh Amerika Syarikat ini. Namun bagi saya antara strategi yang mungkin boleh dipertimbangkan ialah mencari ruang dan peluang sekiranya kita dapat memastikan sebahagian daripada industri utama tempatan seperti industri elektrik dan elektronik dapat dikecualikan daripada dikenakan kenaikan tarif ini. Ini kerana Amerika Syarikat perlu sedar bagaimana peranan Malaysia yang turut sama menyumbang kepada rantaian pengeluaran global yang akhirnya produk-produk ini dihantar ke Amerika Syarikat sendiri. Pada masa sama, kita juga sekiranya ini dapat dicapai, ianya dapat mengurangkan kesan kepada aktiviti dagangan negara yang kerana E&E merupakan komponen penting. Selain itu, komoditi utama negara seperti pasaran produk minyak sawit khususnya boleh diketengahkan, kerana sebelum ini kita banyak berdepan dengan cabaran daripada lobi-lobi yang dibuat oleh industri di Amerika Syarikat seperti soya dan juga jagung. Dan mungkin peluang yang ada, kita dapat mencari ruang untuk mengetengahkan pasaran ataupun membuka pasaran Amerika Syarikat kepada sektor minyak sawit negara. Dan pada masa sama, saya percaya peluang ini boleh dijadikan untuk Malaysia menghidupkan semula peluang perbincangan FTA bersama dengan Amerika Syarikat, kerana sebelum ini Amerika Syarikat telah menarik diri daripada menyertai TPP yang akhirnya dimeterai sebagai CPTPP, dan sekiranya dapat dicapai, ini akan meletakkan Malaysia dalam kedudukan yang baik dalam aktiviti perdagangan global.
Muiz, secara ringkas berbaki 1 minit, apa jangka Muiz berkenaan dengan megatrends global yang mungkin akan berlaku kesan daripada perang dagangan yang nampaknya memberi kesan juga kepada ekonomi utama seperti Eropah dan UK, dan dalam kata lain bagaimana Muiz melihat perubahan ini bakal mencorakkan landscape perdagangan Malaysia dalam tempoh beberapa tahun akan datang?
Dalam satu jangkaan ataupun jangkaan ringkasnya, kita mungkin dapat lihat perubahan strategi yang bakal dibuat oleh syarikat-syarikat utama. Sebelum ini kita dapati pada perang dagangan yang pertama, kebanyakan syarikat menggunakan strategi China plus one. Mungkin pada masa ini kita akan dengar strategi America plus one, kerana syarikat-syarikat besar seperti TSMC, Samsung, Hyundai dan juga Honda telah memberi gambaran mereka akan meningkatkan pelaburan di masyarakat. Cuma pada jangka yang lebih panjang, saya menjangkakan perandangan ini akan menjurus kepada memperkukuhkan lagi hubungan dagangan dengan negara-negara luar. Contohnya keterlibatan Malaysia untuk menyertai BRICS, dan juga kemungkinan kita dapat menggarap lebih tinggi ataupun kolaborasi yang lebih erat di kalangan negara ASEAN. Jadi ini mungkin memberi satu gambaran perubahan landscape dagangan ekonomi negara akan tertumpu ataupun boleh berkembang menuju kepada pasaran-pasaran luar selain daripada Amerika Syarikat.
Baik, seperti yang Muiz katakan, suasana ekonomi pada waktu ini masih lagi stabil, namun kita harus bersedia untuk sebarang ketidaktentuan kerana ini akan memberi impak secara keseluruhan untuk ekonomi negara. Jadi terima kasih diucapkan kepada Abdul Muiz Murhalim, pakar ekonomi MIDF Research. Alright, moving on, US stocks rallied on Thursday with the Dow and S&P 500 posting their 8th straight session of gains after strong results from mega caps Microsoft and Meta eased concerns about artificial intelligence spending. Microsoft surged and hit its highest level since late January, driven by an upbeat quarterly growth forecast for its cloud computing business Azure. Microsoft briefly surpassed Apple to become the world's most valuable company. Meta Platforms rallied and reached a 5-week high during the session after posting higher than expected revenue on the back of a strong advertising performance. The results helped allay fears the massive spending on AI in recent years would not be rewarded and eased concerns that President Donald Trump's tariffs could dent economic growth. According to preliminary data, the S&P 500 gained 33.25 points or 0.60% to end at 5,602.31 points, while the Nasdaq Composite gained 254.04 points or 1.46% to close at 17,700.38. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 70.05 points or 0.17% to 40,739.41. All right, now let's take a break. Let's take a look at breakdown what's happening in the US stock market. And behind me is the S&P 500, where Standard & Poor's 500 index stocks categorized by sectors and industries sizes. And size represents market cap. And we can see a mix of green and red over here. Green means gains and red means losses. And I'm going to start with Meta. Meta over here, it shows a green color besides Google, and it was up by 4.23%. And the stock price right now is 572.21. And as you can see, Google shows the green color as well, and it was up by 1.18% and 162.79 stock price. And the latest update for Meta is shares in artificial intelligence and cloud computing related companies were rising sharply in late trade on Wednesday after Meta Platforms and Microsoft results beat Wall Street expectations. And the reports appeared to boost demand for shares in AI chip leader Nvidia Corp, which rose 2.8% in late trading computing and chip rival advanced micro devices, which rose 2%. Google parent Alphabet shares were up more than 1% after the reports. Shares in Microsoft soared more than 6% in late trading after it topped quarterly revenue expectations on strong Azure cloud computing growth, reassuring investors its hefty AI investments were paying off. And shares in social media company Meta Platforms were up more than 4% after it also beat Wall Street estimates for first quarter revenue, signaling that its AI-powered tools helped draw advertising dollars despite tariff-related economic uncertainty. And that's on the tech giant Meta and also Google. Next one is Tesla. The color is sort of almost red and it was down by 0.58%, and the current stock price is 280.52. And a similar automotive sector is Ford. It was up by 1.70%. Stock price is 10.18. And meanwhile, for GM, General Motors, down by 0.42, and the current stock price is 45.05. But the latest update on Tesla, Tesla's board on Thursday rushed to defend its chief executive Elon Musk, assuring he had the board's confidence amid rising investor worries about his prolonged absences, polarizing politics, and the EV makers' plunging sales and profit. The board reacted after Wall Street Journal report that it had considered replacing Musk, which board chair Robin Denholm denied. Denholm herself has taken heat for her high compensation and perceived failures to hold Musk accountable to shareholders. The latest Musk drama underscores the unique dilemma Tesla board faces in managing him, as he oversees 5 other companies and more recently has focused primarily on advising Republican US President Donald Trump, alienating Tesla's politically liberal customer base. Yet seldom have a company's fortunes depended more heavily on the persona of its CEO, making even the notion of replacing him an enormous risk, according to investors, analysts, and 3 people with knowledge of debates about Musk among Tesla executives. And the last one is about Amazon. Amazon was green as well. It was up by 3.13%, and stock prices is standing at 190.20. And the latest update on Amazon is Amazon.com on Thursday reported first quarter cloud revenue growth and forecast operating income below estimates, disappointing investors. And shares of the company fell as much as 5% in after-hours trading before moderating. Amazon Web Services, the company's cloud unit, recorded a 16.9% increase in quarterly revenue to $29.27 billion, missing expectations of 17.4% growth and $30.9 billion in sales. High tariffs imposed by US President Donald Trump on goods imported from China have caused uncertainty on retailers such as Amazon. Some sellers, for instance, have said they plan to sit out the company's heavily promoted Prime Day sales event in July, Reuters reported. And that's on the update of US markets, S&P 500 for today. And we have a lot more of today's updates by my colleague Tehmina Kaoosji. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Tariffs on imports of products from China reaching up to 145%.
Tariffs on the rest of the world are sitting at 10%, with the potential for reciprocal tariffs to be reimposed within 90 days.
Kunjungan rasmi Presiden China ke Malaysia ini menunjukkan komitmen kedua-dua negara untuk meningkatkan hubungan diplomatik ke tahap yang lebih strategik.
The Blues berjuang merebut tempat di kalangan terbaik Eropah. Tetapi perjalanan mereka penuh halangan. Dalam cabaran genting, mereka harus menakluki pasukan terbaik Liga. Mampukah Chelsea mengalahkan Liverpool? Wow, that's how you do it. Sekarang ini bakal terungkai secara langsung. Premier League, eksklusif di Astro.
Program Sentuhan Kasih Rakyat Sabah atau Syukur merekodkan lebih 68,000 penerima menerima bayaran bagi fasa pertama.
225 unit rumah kos rendah sedang dibina di 5 lokasi strategik seluruh Sabah.
Kerajaan Negeri Sabah disaran mengkaji semula kaedah pengiraan kadar kemiskinan yang digunakan pada ketika ini agar lebih mencerminkan realiti sebenar.
Kerajaan Sarawak mahu terus memperkukuhkan hubungan dengan pelajar Sarawak di seluruh Malaysia menerusi program Ngabas Anak Sarawak.
Sekarang dia nak kena redo je ke?
I harap
Azim kena scam dengan perempuan lain.
I ada idea. Kita rompak Azimat.
Kak Di?
Kau!
Madam boleh kira full amount yang hilang minggu lepas. Eloi, I mau tahu dari mana duit itu datang.
First Wives. Stream episod terbaru dahulu. Eksklusif on demand dan 9 malam di Astro Citra.
Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. Niaga Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now, this week in future affairs, it's a Labour Day spotlight on the care workforce. So as we mark Labour Day 2025, we stand at a very pivotal moment in Malaysia's journey towards economic equity and workers' rights. Today, we turn our focus to a workforce that is often unseen, yet undeniably essential. We're talking about the care professionals who uphold the very fabric of our society. In Malaysia now, the care sector is predominantly feminized, with women constituting the majority of care professions such as nurses, contract hospital sanitation workers, domestic workers, as well as social workers. Yet, this demographic reality is met with systemic undervaluation. Now, the Malaysian Administrative Modernization and Management Planet Unit, or MAMPU for short, reports a staggering shortage in one of these professions. Malaysia has only one social worker for every 8,576 people. Now, in contrast, Singapore has one social worker for every 3,448 people. Another snapshot of care professions. The Ministry of Health projects a shortfall of over 43,000 nurses required to meet the demands of new and existing hospital facilities. Now, these figures are, of course, part of a broader concern, with the country facing an estimated shortage of 113,472 nurses by the end of 2025. Health Minister Datuk Sri Dr. Zulkifli Ahmad has also warned that the nursing shortage could reach nearly 60% by 2030 if current trends actually continue. Niaga Spotlight today discusses critical issues impacting our care workforce, as well as actionable strategies to address the mounting care crisis as Malaysia ages amid demographic changes, all of which make these services ever more integral to both our national and social well-being. I now have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Anis Farid, Research Project Manager for WeCare with Women's Aid Organisation, WAO, together with Waniza Muniandi, Executive Director with the Malaysian Association of Social Workers, MASW, who join me now live in the studios. A very good morning to the both of you. How are we doing?
Good. Good morning to you too.
Fantastic. So it's really wonderful to have you both in here, especially in conjunction with Labour Day. Anis, perhaps let's first begin with expanding a little on the feminized nature of care professions, which is also what leads to the fact that it's systemically undervalued, both economically and socially too.
Yes. So this is definitely something that we noticed and we knew, which is really what began the ReCare project, which is a nationwide research project that we started in 2022 at Women's Aid Organisation in collaboration with academics from the University of Alberta, University Malaya, and stakeholders as well from the Ministry of Health and Talent Corp, as part of the Women Rights Initiative, which is funded by the IDRC in Canada, as well as other Canadian research bodies. So as you mentioned, we know that care work in Malaysia is feminized, meaning more women are taking part in care work, whether it's paid or unpaid, formally or informally. So our goal with ReCare was to really understand the feminized nature of this care work and how do care workers manage their professional care responsibilities with their personal care responsibilities. Before, during, and after the pandemic in particular, to ensure that the lessons that we learned during the pandemic are actually taken into account for future crises preparedness. So our focus then is on the paid care workforce. So we're looking at the three sectors, healthcare, namely doctors, nurses, and hospital cleaners, social care, so social workers, as well as those who provide care for children, the elderly, and people with disabilities, as well as domestic care. So we're also looking at domestic workers from Indonesia and the Philippines. So in our view, these are essential care workers because they were the ones who needed to spring into action during the COVID-19 pandemic in their various capacities, and we believe it's important for their work and contributions to be recognized. I think Malaysia is very security focused when we think about crisis preparedness or disaster response, without taking into consideration the people who take care of us and support us and how they are also essential to crisis response. So all of this to say is that from our research, one of the biggest things that we did was a survey with 1,500 respondents. And I can tell you the survey involved the care workers from the occupations that I mentioned, and 75% of our respondents were women, which indicates the very feminized nature of this workforce.
Absolutely. And obviously all of these professions also require immense amounts of skill, emotional labor, as well as combined with physical effort. We'll also go into the unpaid care work that naturally also quite comes with the fact that most of the respondents who are care work professionals are also women then. But first of all, Vanessa, I'd actually like to move into talking more about social work. But I'd like to actually preface that with starting with another data point that I picked up on recently. So annually, the World Bank's Women, Business and Law report, it tracks the state of work. Malaysia also happens to be one of 178 countries globally which maintain legal barriers that prevent women's full economic participation. I actually want to connect this back to something which the Malaysian Association for Social Work, with yourself as its executive director, has been strongly advocating for. The tabling and passing of the social work profession bill. Tell me more about this struggle.
Okay, thanks, Tehmina. I think before even going to tabling of the social workers bill, I think what I would like to address is what social workers are, like who are the social workers. So social work is actually a trained profession where these social workers are trained in practice-based profession basically. So what they do is that they work with these vulnerable communities which involve B40 community, orang asli, elderly people, person with disabilities, women and children. And what do? Is that they work from the psychosocial aspect, so from the point where they conduct assessments and provide assistance for these survivors. So just to give a brief example on how social workers function is that, for example, if there is a domestic violence survivor, say if she comes with her children, right? So what the social worker does is that she will conduct an assessment with this client. So this assessment is the psychosocial assessment where she will assess the client's needs and she will provide the assistance accordingly. So it will start from bringing her to the police station, launching a police report, doing the follow-ups with the investigation officers and so on. Secondly, it will also involve hospitals where social workers will actually accompany the client or refer to the hospitals and go through the process with them to assess their injuries and so on. And if there's any future further follow-ups, then the social workers will also assist them with that. And thirdly will also be school transfers and so on. So since there are children involved, they have to work with the schools to do school transfers and all that for the children, and work very closely with JKM, with our welfare officers department. So the social workers actually work with them to get the protection order, to do the placement for the children and women and so on. So moving on, and also what they do is that they do empowerment programs for the client, sometimes not just empowering them but also helping them to get a job or empowering them to get skills development program, go and join those programs, right?
Moving to that next step in their lives, right?
Correct, yeah. So the social workers' job don't just stop at this point where we assist them or accompanying them, but it also go to a point where we make sure that the client is independent later on. So again, coming back to the bill, why is it crucial for the bill is that...
Exactly, because everything that you've just mentioned, and thank you so much for giving us the full context of what basically a day in the life of a social worker in Malaysia might look like. There is clearly what I can discern, a very standardized framework for all the applications as well as the duties which go into the work that social workers do. It is also defined as social work. So henceforth, of course, why has a bill that's been drafted as early back as 2010 still struggling and not yet in Parliament?
I think it's because of the recognition, the lack of understanding in the community as well about what is social work, who are these social workers, and also the awareness, the lack of awareness among people on social work. And also if the bill actually gets passed and all, then later on there's actually a lot of investment that needs to be done in this field, especially to give training and certification programs that staff has to join and improve themselves on.
Yeah, absolutely, because I think it also helps you to have clear ethical guidelines and maybe even competency benchmarks, so that you can actually further standardize everyone. Because of course, social work is not only required within the Klang Valley area, right? For example. Thanks very much for that, Vanessa. So, Anis, perhaps moving back into looking at polycrises. We, of course, experienced a very recent one, which was the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, looking and fast-forwarding to the Madani government's approach to navigating polycrisis, but at the same time, let's now frame it within the context of empowering women's role in the care economy. The care economy has been spoken about in much greater detail, especially since the end of December 22 onwards. But where are we today now in 2025, mid-2025, with relation to care work professions that are already existing?
I think I want to take a step back and sort of highlight one of the biggest findings from the ReCare study. Of course, these findings are still preliminary as we are still finalizing our analyses. But I think this touches on an important point in your question about the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that it has had on our care workers. I don't think we've really taken stock of that because care workers had to have extended hours, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic. They were working day in, day out, non-stop responding to the crisis. And this has obviously had an impact on their well-being. So what we found is that amongst the care workers that we surveyed, 3/4 of them actually experienced a drop in their well-being during the pandemic compared to their well-being levels before the pandemic. When we're talking about well-being, it encompasses physical, mental health, as well as job satisfaction, work-life balance, and the support that they had for their paid and unpaid care work. Now, of these 3/4 that did experience a drop in their well-being, 2/3 actually have not recovered to their pre-pandemic levels of well-being. And what we're seeing within the data is that amongst the men and women is the women actually who have been slower to recover compared to the men. And what this means and what we're seeing is that 1 in 3 care workers have, in our survey, responded that they are planning to leave their current position within the next 5 years. So this is a very big concern, I think, given that we already have a care deficit in Malaysia. We don't have enough care workers in the country. But what this is telling us is that beyond a care deficit, we may be heading towards a care crisis.
Clearly, and I don't think you're overstating or exaggerating, because compounding factors are actually pointing us towards that direction. I would argue that one of the most formalized of these sectors, which is the nursing profession, we heard what the stats are, and the fact that we are already losing a number of nurses, not due to the fact that colleges and institutions are not producing enough qualified nurses, but also them then opting to perhaps not work in Malaysia and go perhaps to Singapore or to other countries where perhaps it's better regulated, also involving economic support and fair compensation, right? So I think these are really crucial issues as well, Anis. What specific strategies could then be maybe implemented to ensure that women care workers are adequately supported and also protected in future crises? Because it's always about, not just future-proofing, but learning from what we went through during the pandemic.
Absolutely. So we know that care work is gendered. In that traditional gender roles and norms have always positioned women to undertake this care work. But this also means that care work is undervalued. And we know this because half of the respondents in the survey are in B40 income households, meaning they are undervalued, underpaid for all of the work that they do. So in terms of adequately supporting women and ensuring that our care workforce is resilient as we move forward. The first is obviously to recognize them as essential care workers. They are essential to our country. Recognizing them as essential also brings dignity to the job that they are doing, and how they have supported us as the backbone of the nation, especially in times of crisis. Recognizing them as essential would also support in having clearer plans about which care workers are needed where and for what crisis response, which brings me to my second point. We need to also ensure that they have adequate support for their unpaid care work. I think a lot of times we view care workers as just people who are doing this job. We forget that they have lives outside of the work that they do, families that they also have to take care of and that they care about. So in undertaking the Recare project, we did focus group discussions with women care workers across the country, and there was this very salient theme that women feel as though they are alone and they have to do it all by themselves. It's a sort of superwoman syndrome where they feel like they don't have anyone to really depend on and rely on, which speaks in volumes about the amount of care support that's actually needed by our care workers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, to bring it together from a policy approach, that would definitely entail gender-sensitive wage reforms and perhaps also gender-sensitized cash transfer programs during actual ongoing crises. From there, moving into Vanessa. So, of course, we mentioned the huge deficit in the number of care workers, social workers, ratio-wise when it comes to Malaysia's population, close to 1 to 9,000 of our population. From MASW's perspective, Vanessa, what needs to be done to actually ensure that commensurately we can actually increase the number of social workers who are then there available in the Malaysian labour market to meet the needs?
Okay. I think the first thing to do is that to table the bill, because again it comes back to recognizing the profession. So I think because of that, that's why even most of the graduates from social work are not actually in the field working as social workers. It's mainly because of the recognition issue.
Right.
And secondly is also because the salary the salary is low for the social workers, because again they don't recognize the profession as a profession itself. So that's why the salary is low, and therefore it doesn't really empower people or motivates people to actually be in this field, or even when they are, they don't tend to last quite long, because like what Ani said earlier, sometimes the support is needed. There's a lot of support that's needed, and there's a lot of resources needed for them. So to have that work-life balance for social workers, it's also very important, because like I said, this job requires the social workers to be mentally, physically and emotionally invested. So it's not a job that, it's 9 to 5 job where you can do any time. So it involves a lot of aspects. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another factor I'd like to pick up on, which we lightly touched on earlier, Vanessa, is how there's also a lot of geographic disparities between the distribution of social workers as opposed to population needs. One factor you'd already mentioned was the low pay. On average, it's less than 2,500 ringgit per month, whereas, of course, our most recently established parameters for a living wage is 3,100 ringgit. Let's also talk about perspectives that MASW has picked up as being critical for geographical disparities. Kuching in Sarawak, of course, a service population of potentially 2.4 million people doesn't even have 5 registered social workers.
Yeah.
Tell us about these issues in greater detail.
Yep. So if we see right now, JKM is located in every state, right? So there is actually child protectors, there are social workers there who assist clients. However, there are NGOs. There's not much NGOs like you said, Sabah, Sarawak. There's not much NGOs to assist survivors over there, clients over there. So they all depend, and sometimes NGOs work on their own. So we don't really know who is doing what work at certain point. So it also comes back to JKM has less social workers. And then registered social workers, and if let's say NGO social workers are registered and given the license, then it will actually help the community over there. So in any areas, actually, not just Klang Valley, but also outside of Klang Valley.
Exactly. I can think of perhaps from a policy approach, maybe expanding recruitment and even fast-tracking training. Would that perhaps actually work for areas which are, of course, outside of the urban centres to help increase the ratio of social workers?
Yeah, definitely. Since there are already people practicing social work, right, but they don't know it's actually social work, and they don't really have a...
So bring them into the formalized fold.
So that's something MASW does actually. So we provide trainings and consultations for NGO who already have social workers or case workers in ground who's actually doing that work. So we actually provide them counselling, trainings and workshops as well.
Fantastic. Vanessa, Anis, thank you so much for the conversation and so far. Don't go anywhere. We come back after a short brief break with Niaga Spotlight's Labor Day Focus.
Gempur di Awani 7:45.
Longman is nothing but a madman yang tengah gila dendam. He's not the hero people think he is. Dia langsung tak fikir pasal the consequences of his actions. He's a time bomb. He is not a dark knight. Kita enjoy.
Tariffs on imports of products from China reaching up to 145%.
Tariffs on the rest of the world are sitting at 10%, with the potential for reciprocal tariffs to be reimposed within 90 days.
Kunjungan rasmi Presiden China ke Malaysia ini menunjukkan komitmen kedua-dua negara untuk meningkatkan hubungan diplomatik ke tahap yang lebih strategik.
Program Sentuhan Kasih Rakyat Sabah atau Syukur merekodkan lebih 68,000 penerima menerima bayaran bagi fasa pertama.
225 unit rumah kos rendah sedang dibina di 5 lokasi strategik seluruh Sabah.
Kerajaan Negeri Sabah disaran mengkaji semula kaedah pengiraan kadar kemiskinan yang digunakan pada ketika ini agar lebih mencerminkan realiti sebenar.
Kerajaan Sarawak mahu terus memperkukuhkan hubungan dengan pelajar Sarawak di seluruh Malaysia menerusi program Ngabas Anak Sarawak.
Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight. Still with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. And today for our Labor Day 2025 special, we are focusing on Malaysia's care workforce. Anis, continuing on with the conversation. So the ReCare study by WAO emphasizes the need for, of course, resilience in Malaysia's essential care workforce and infrastructure. Ideally speaking, let's now break this down into what this ought to look like in the very near future, if not as soon as possible.
So I think one helpful framework in our research has been the International Labour Organization's 5R framework for decent care work, which outlines 5 Rs that are important in making care work decent work. So the first is recognition, and I think that's really the main theme of the conversation that we're having today is the need to recognize those who are in the essential care workforce, especially under-recognized professions such as social work, but also to reduce, so the second R is to reduce, which is to reduce labor-intensive tasks. The third is to redistribute, which is shifting care responsibilities from women to other members of the family or society. Reward, ensuring that care workers are adequately compensated for the work that they do, as well as represent, ensuring that care workers and what they need and want are reflected in decisions about them, in policies about them. So when we're talking about supporting care workers and ensuring that the care workforce is resilient. I think one R that is important is redistribution in supporting the unpaid care needs of our care workers. And it's not just about redistributing from members of the family. It's really also about shifting from the private sphere rather to the public sphere. So we need more government involvement in creating like infrastructure that helps also care workers access these supports. As I mentioned, 50% of our respondents are in the B40 communities, which means they fall out of certain benefits and reliefs that are given to those who pay taxes, right? So if they are not even benefiting from the work that they provide, who is taking care of our care workers? And I think that's an important question that we think about, and that's why the other R of rewarding is important, ensuring that care workers are paid a livable salary.
Absolutely. Perhaps if I can pick up on one specific demographic within the paid care workers. There are also, of course, informal and migrant care workers, many of them women who work specifically in the domestic care work sector. Let's talk about the importance of formalizing and protecting also these somewhat informal care workers in the industry and some of the, of course, issues that have come and risen to prominence from the research of ReCare.
Definitely. I think a lot of times when we position domestic workers and domestic care as part of the care workforce and the care economy, there is a bit of pushback because I don't think people really realize the contributions that domestic workers give to our society. A lot of women, for example, would not be able to engage in the formal labor force if they didn't have domestic workers that were supporting them in their homes. And we know domestic workers also during the COVID-19 pandemic, in households that had domestic workers, obviously they were the ones taking on the bulk of like the disinfecting, the taking care of the sick. And we know that we have a shortage, for example, of elder care facilities, elder care institutions, care for people with disabilities, things like that. A lot of times this care also falls onto domestic workers. So they really do make up they absorb a lot of the care work that we can't find like public services for, which is why their recognition is essential. The problem also is that domestic workers are not, for example, even included in the Employment Act. So sometimes they are not even, there's no enforcement around like minimum wage for them, for example. So sometimes you'll find domestic workers who haven't been paid in years. And the regulations around the working conditions of domestic workers is not as present, for example, with other care sectors like healthcare and social care.
Exactly, and because it is quite often invisibilized, at least to broader society and even the government's eyes, it then, of course, ends up in another host of potential abuses which domestic workers, especially if they're migrant and perhaps on the precipice of being legal versus not having formalized documents, that it then brings about. Thanks very much for that, Anis. I think it's also a very good juncture at which to also emphasize the need for investments in public care infrastructure. You'd mentioned the fact that domestic care workers, of course, take on many of the duties besides just domestic work per se, which also includes childcare, includes elder care, sometimes also the intersections of disability care. So all of these are really critical issues which I think more and more Malaysian society is becoming sensitized towards. That brings me to Vanessa. So speaking once again and now digging deeper into compensation, fair wages for social workers. Now, civil servants on one hand are set to, of course, receive a substantial salary increase. The compensation for social workers, as we just mentioned, does remain disproportionately low. So let's talk about how governance systems can now reframe it with connection to the fact that social work is a non-negotiable sector as a profession and as a need for Malaysian society.
So I think number one, again, coming back to the tabling of the bill, recognizing the profession and having a regulatory body for this, so that the service that we provide for the clients or the survivors is standardized among all sectors. Right now we are talking about private and public sectors, right? However, we are serving the same population, we are serving the same group of people, and it's important that the standards, the competency standards is same across all, regardless of private and government, right? Yeah, so that's something that we need to do, is that tabling of the bill and to ensure that the regulatory body is there. And second is also to have investment or budget to improve for continuous improvement of the care workers or social workers as well, so that they can continuously improve themselves through trainings, accreditation, like any certification programs and so on. In that way, that can also help them to increase their salary.
Absolutely. And also perhaps the recognition of social work as an essential public service on par with the more medicalized healthcare sector. Would that also help, you feel?
I think definitely, because like I said, social workers are placed in education sectors, medical sectors, and they are supposed to be placed in school sectors as well. So if we invest in this field, it will definitely help the community and the government as well. Because by doing this, we'll actually reduce the social issues in the community, and that will also reduce the dependency on the government later on. So which means there's probably, have a less chances of us to, have a rehabilitation center and so on. Instead of that, we can invest in this kind of our staff itself.
Exactly. Speaking of investments in staff, Vanessa, perhaps you could provide us with a snapshot of the type of caseload burdens which individual social workers face, particularly in urban hubs, let's say perhaps Kuala Lumpur or Selangor. What does that look like?
Basically, like we saw the ratio, right, 1/8,000. That's for, let's say, government JKM officers. However, we look at private sectors, they are actually doing more as well. How many NGOs are there, right? For example, in Klang Valley, we have WAO, we have AWAM and so on. But how much they can take? They are actually attending to about 2,000 clients per year, but there's only much that they can do, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So there's many intersections whereby which we can perhaps then move towards promoting public awareness and respect for the profession, because also we have seen this very interesting not just pushback but actually feedback mechanism. When there is increased public awareness of the actual roles of social workers, that can also lead to furthering the efforts of advocacy. Some ideas on that perhaps?
Yeah, also having formal complaint mechanisms where there's actually a body that actually supervises the social workers. So if there's any complaints that need to be raised or any improvement that needs to be done, then it can be done through this. And also creating awareness about social work itself will actually help the community.
Exactly, because once the public, I think, understands the impact of social work, then it naturally becomes something which the general public wants as a non-negotiable. It could even be something which comes up in campaign or election manifestos, perhaps, knowing that, say, for example, a specific area, an Adun, for example, has several critical social issues that have been identified, so they probably need a higher ratio by this many more social workers. Thanks, Vanessa. Anis, coming into the ReCare studies, very interesting multi-sectoral approach, which of course collaborates with various stakeholders. Tell us more about the opportunity for this collaborative model to be expanded. And here we'd like to focus on including more diverse voices and perspectives to ensure the intersectionality of care workers' experience is actually reflected in any upcoming legislation or policies.
Absolutely. Within the initial grant itself, there was actually a requirement to involve decision-maker stakeholders, so people within government that could help support the policy uptake, with the idea being that it could, since the project has been like around 3 years now, having them invested over the life course helps them also more invested in putting things through forward. That said, that's obviously coming from a top perspective, in terms of like bottom up, we have actually also involved care workers in our research as research associates. So this is part of a participatory approach where the care workers themselves were actually the ones, for example, who led the focus group discussions. So they were doing data collection. They also helped us with like interpretation and analysis of the data that they collected. And this is really helpful because as researchers, we might not know what exactly it is that care workers need. For example, when we're talking about how important social workers are, I think one of the biggest issues in our lack of recognition and awareness of what social work is, many of them actually face a lot of barriers during the COVID-19 pandemic to do the work that they needed to do. For example, to deliver the food baskets, things like that. So there is this important need of involving the care workers in the research so that their perspectives and the struggles that they went through can be recorded as data. Because if it's not, if they're not involved, it just becomes like something that's anecdotal, something that we hear about. But to actually process it into data, I think is important because then it becomes something that we can present to policymakers. So in terms of making the collaborative model more inclusive, I think it also helps to speak to, for example, care recipients. We recently did a roundtable discussion to share our recommendations with the care workers, but we also invited people with disabilities because they are potential care recipients of people who provide care for people with disabilities. And I think that also enriches the perspectives within the research because then we can also consider what are the needs of the recipients of the care work.
Exactly. Now, what this is actually speaking to me is that there's also a need to strengthen multi-sector partnerships. Now, there are, of course, several ministries that have supported the ReCare research and study. Tell us more about perhaps some ideas around how this could form a national advisory panel or a consultative working group that can then actually harmonize both strategy, resources, and also policy implementation in the near future.
I think that would be obviously like our goal and something that we would want. But the nature sometimes of government is also to be very siloed. So bringing everyone to a table would be important through something like a national care council or something like that, which could have representatives not just from like ministries and agencies, but also from the care workers themselves, representatives from associations that can bring up the concerns of care workers. For example, like MASW should be involved in something like this National Care Council because they know what social workers in Malaysia need. Whether or not this is something that's feasible obviously depends on political will, but I think given the great interest that there has been in the care economy, anything might be possible. We can remain optimistic.
Yeah, I think we have the opportunity to remain optimistic, especially because care policy proposals and evaluations, they have the opportunity now to be gender and intersectionality impact assessed. From there, Vanessa, perhaps one last area of discussion before we wrap things up. Now, Malaysia's changing, shifting demographics and aging population is, of course, a reality. We're no longer anticipating it, it's already happened. And our aging population is projected to reach roughly 17% of the total population by 2040. What are some ways in which MASW imagines that social work will not only be transformed, but also what needs to be prepared for to ensure that social workers are able to adequately address and work towards equitable, not just opportunity for themselves, but services for the people who are going to be increasingly older, but also living at intersections of poverty as well as disability.
I think to address this, Tehmina, I think what MASW would do is we will continue to train the frontliners. For example, like frontliners are not just government staff, but also NGO staffs as well. So we will work closely with them and to continue to provide workshops and trainings for them to ensure that how do you deal with elderly individuals, what kind of support that you can provide for them. Caretakers as well, not just social work, but I also mean like caretakers as well. So we we will continuously provide consultation, trainings and workshops for NGOs to better deal with elderly population.
Exactly. And I can think of just a couple of points such as geriatric care, dementia specialized support, and also I think age-friendly case management. How are your social workers, from the reports that you received back, already dealing with this, even though it may not form a significant volume just yet?
So far, I think because, like I said, it's not that much yet, the number of cases reported. So whenever there is, if there's any complex cases, they will definitely reach out to MASW or any of our members, and then we will provide those advice to them.
And any thoughts on how perhaps integrating social workers into existing or near future community-based aging healthcare initiatives?
I think moving forward, we will work more closely with the community itself, because it will no longer will be just the social worker assisting the elderly individuals, because like what Ani said earlier, there's also family members involved when it comes to elderly people. So it's no longer just doctors or social workers, but also a community approach to be more inclusive of them in our daily life.
Absolutely. And any last thoughts on the fact that the Ministry of Women, Family, Community Development, on the other hand, has been vocal about the support for the tabling of the social work profession bill?
We hope that this tabling of the social workers bill will happen soon, and that it will also cover private and public sectors as well, to have a standardized practice and also competency standards across all sectors.
Exactly. So not just standardization, but regulation, which also then perhaps leads to the opportunity for gender sensitive, gender sensitized wages, which close also the gender pay gap. Thank you very much, Vanessa, as well as Anis. It's been a really interesting discussion, and we hope and wish all success with, firstly, the professionalization of the social work profession bill, as well as the outcomes of the ReCare study.
Thank you.
Well, as we commemorate Labour Day 2025, let us honour the care workforce not with mere applause, but with tangible action. We must not just advocate for the professionalisation of social work, ensuring fair wages, career development opportunities and mental health support for them, as well as nurses, contract hospital sanitation workers and domestic workers, the core workforce who dedicate their working lives for supporting Malaysian society. The time to act is now. This has been Niaga Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. We'll see you next Friday with more business analysis and insights. Here's to a productive week ahead. All right, so we just...
Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera. Ini agenda AWANI bersama saya Nazrika Ha. Minggu ini, pentadbiran Trump sudah memasuki 100 hari sejak mengambil alih Oval Office untuk fasa kedua ataupun penggal kedua pentadbiran Donald Trump sebagai Presiden baru Amerika Syarikat. Dan dalam 100 hari ini kita lihat tumpuan kepada pentadbiran Trump, iaitu mengimbangi perdagangan dunia dengan Amerika Syarikat, di mana kenaikan tarif iaitu Liberation Day yang diumumkan pada 3 minggu lalu benar-benar memberikan impak kepada perdagangan dunia, kerana negara-negara yang melakukan perdagangan dengan Amerika Syarikat, terutamanya yang mempunyai surplus ataupun jurang defisit yang besar, dikenakan kenaikan tarif yang agak besar, terutamanya negara China dan negara-negara seperti EU, Kanada, Mexico dan juga termasuk kita Malaysia. Dan antara perkara penting juga dilakukan pentadbiran Trump dengan tanda tangan executive order beliau, iaitu mengetatkan polisi imigrasi ataupun immigration Amerika Syarikat, di mana ramai sekali mereka yang berada di Amerika Syarikat, sama ada mereka mendapat visa ataupun PR dan seumpamanya, sudah pun dideportasi ataupun sedang diburu oleh pihak imigrasi ataupun pihak berkuasa Amerika Syarikat, dan memperketatkan pintu masuk terutamanya dari selatan yang bersepadan dengan Mexico. Ini merupakan polisi yang sudah pun dijanjikan ketika kempen pilihan raya Presiden Donald Trump. Begitu juga bagaimana beliau cuba melakukan efisiensi ataupun mengurangkan bajet ataupun peruntukan kepada agensi-agensi federal yang dikatakan membazir, yang dikatakan banyak ketirisan dan tidak perlu dalam pelaksanaan federal government. Itu menjadi tumpuan di mana yang menjadi ketuanya